Today, we'll hopefully take you all on an insightful 30-minute or so journey discussing the VindKOMP project, which was a survey carried out by the Norwegian Competence Centre for Offshore Wind about the future skills for offshore wind that incorporated extensive involvement of representatives from all part of the value chain in offshore wind. And we'll also discuss some views on how to recruit or find those needed skills and competence that are either within your organisation or outside of your organisation. Grethe, maybe for the benefit of the listeners who won't know of you and your organisation, could you do an introduction?
Yeah, sure. So hello, everyone. I'm Grethe Frislie, so the project manager at HavvindNO, which is what we call ourselves for short. It's a bit hard to just say the entire name when we are introducing ourselves live. But we're one of the few actors within the Norwegian offshore wind sector that has no plans to actually build the wind parks or deliver any physical part of the supply chain. We're kind of here to serve all the actors, and I hope you can see the pictures I'm showing.
Yeah.
We're here to serve all the actors within the sector by sharing kind of the factual information that's out there via our webpage. And we're producing the quality assured reports that we're finding and producing them ourselves as well. And making physical appearances and like webinars like this. And we kind of want to make sure that the public sector and the private sectors are able to align so that we can meet the goals of the government and the industry, both for development in Norway, but also for the export part internationally.
Thanks, Grethe. And by way of brief introduction to those that don't know me, I'm a talent professional with over 25 years experience now, and I'm working extensively within offshore wind and the wider renewables sector with my employer Six Group. Six Group's an exec search and people performance consultancy. We're headquartered in the UK, work globally. The recruitment process and the skills identification strategy for offshore wind fascinates me immensely, and I often hear that talent is cited as one of the three main roadblocks to successful renewable energy projects. We'll talk a little bit more of that later. But first of all, we'll start with that skills mapping. And Grethe, could you just walk us through the VindKOMP project a little more?
Yeah, sure. So the VindKOMP project is basically a map the skills and capacity that the industry needs, and then map the competence development opportunities within the educational system. Then do a gap analysis and work with the results to bridge the gap as soon as possible, because we don't have much time if there's people missing, and we have found that there's people missing for what we need. So we basically challenged the industry to estimate their needs for personnel, skills, and capacity. And early on, we saw that we had to take the holistic view of it. We had to ensure that an entire value chain was represented. So we kind of used this model to identify the actors, what their services was, and just have what was in Norway. And as you can see there under turbine supply, there is a part of the turbine supply that is not delivered in Norway. So that is excluded from the survey, but it's a really important part as well. So then we approached the industry to have them make this estimation, and we puzzled all the estimations together. But in order to do that, they also needed like the same context. So we made two reference projects basically, and they were one for bottom fixed and one for floating, so that we could estimate the number of people needed. The results we got were of such high quality, and the work behind the analysis was really thorough. So it has been really fun to share the results with the industry. The second phase is on the way. It's not finished yet. The first phase is finished. It's about the educational system to map the competence and skills development that they are currently producing and doing the gap analysis. And then we are going to try to help both the policymakers, the educational system, and the industry themselves to like, how do we produce the right kind of people in the right kind of time? And the industry has been really awesome helping us with phase one, and the academics and the educational system and like the municipalities are really, really on board for the phase two as well. So it's looking to be really good phase two results as well. But that won't be clear until later this year. Our biggest finding is actually that the marine operations has a much bigger influence than we thought before. There's ports that has been excluded a bit from thinking about the offshore wind, but it's really, really important. It's one of the bottlenecks for Norway. And it has resulted in another project. We won't discuss that here. But yeah, it's been a really, really good project, and it's been really fun to be able to share it afterwards.
Thanks, Grethe. Obviously, a particular focus for me is the white collar side of offshore wind, being a search firm, and there's a lot of projects now in what we call development phase before the need for those sort of construction and ops personnel. What did you learn from this VindKOMP project about the sort of value chain across offshore wind?
Well, we had a lot of results from it. Basically, we had to identify when all the different segments in the value chain happened to try to find the competence needed in each part of it. And we got really good results from it. Like the duration of each of these phases are a result from the estimations. So basically, the development phase here it's 2 years before the project is awarded to someone, because there's a lot of work going on with the applications and surveys and stuff, and then 3 years afterwards. And then we could go further into it. So this is the entirety of a project, an offshore wind project. This is like the 100% of it. And we saw that like 1% of them are in the development phase for those 5 years. And they are mostly white collar. But for the other phases, it's a bit harder to see how much is the white collar part here. Because we see in the construction and installation phase, there's a lot of people involved. Really a lot of people, operators and technicians. So then we had to granulate it even more. And that's when we got the full-time equivalents distributed by competency category. So this is just put into a timeline. And then we can see the development of the white collars here. There's, yeah, for the years it has been, and a couple of years forward now, it's mainly just the white collars. But in a few years, there will be a slight increase in the white collars needed. And the thing is, like, that it's about 1% for one project, and that's approximately 2,000 people, because an entire project needs approximately 20,000 people. And you will have the professionals, the white collars you need now, but they will not necessarily have the right context. They will have to be educated really quickly into what is offshore wind. And some has already started this, and some is doing it, and others have to recruit, or either internally or externally, either in Norway or internationally. So yeah, it's been kind of fun to look into how many there will be, and that the thing is that these might be the same people throughout the entire lifetime, or it will have to be a change in how many there will be as well, and how many will go off with pensions. Yeah. And this is basically, this is the value chain distributed across like all the different segments of it. And that doesn't really show the white collar part of it, but it's an interesting picture to have anyway.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen organisations have difficulty in identifying and assessing the right competence in development stage. It's interesting that you mentioned transferable experience, something we promote, as well as learning ability and training support, again, something we talk about. Anything else that you saw from that's worth sharing, Grethe?
Yeah, well, I think there will be a large fluctuation in the amount of operators and technicians that will be needing, corresponding with all these white collars. And that will be such a tough capacity to fill. So I think it's really important that the white collar professionals make sure to make really good systems that attract and retains the technical skills that is needed, and have a really good plan for making sure that the supply is always matching the demand, and like treat them as the scarce talent that they are. But also just having a bit more view of the importance of the whole value chain and knowing more parts of it. You can't just sit there and know something about economics, for example, because you need to have some of the more contextual information as well, and maybe talk with people further down the value chain.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges that offshore wind organisations face is that they need to make a conscious shift from what I call the traditional. Traditional recruitment thinking is generally skewed towards hiring for experience and credentials rather than capability or potential. It's the safe way of hiring, but it means that the new talent that you bring into the organisation frequently doesn't move the needle enough, and that's what offshore wind needs. And what offshore wind organisations should be doing, in my opinion, is hiring for capability and competence and potential. So how do you do this? I guess you start by looking at competency-based selection methodologies. You link it to evidence and a matrix of evidence for the types of questions you should be asking about what did people do, how they did it, why did they do it. It allows you to uncover a whole range of capabilities that potentially are useful to offshore wind. Traditional models of recruitment generally focus on experience and past achievements as well. And then we automatically assume they translate into future performance. And of course, that's part of it. Past performance can be a strong indicator of future performance. But with assessing potential or overcompetencies, and looking at core potential indicators, some of the ones that we've talked about with clients is curiosity, that willingness to learn and adapt, insight, an ability to analyze and sort of make sense of complex situations, what we call engagement, that sort of passion for work and ability to connect with others, determination, that resilience and persistence in the face of challenges. I think anyone that's been in offshore wind the last few years will have had buckets of that. And I think if you get the people with those skills, that's where you can find people that can thrive in offshore wind. And they're all hugely important requirements. So techniques that we use to do that, we look at structured interviews and case studies to particularly address and assess adaptability and problem solving. We have a behavioural assessment methodology similar to those ones above, rather than just focusing on past experience. And then we try to provide onboarding and learning opportunities to bridge knowledge gaps. So, don't necessarily just stop when the candidate signs the contract. The point that I sort of mentioned earlier, comes up in conversations a lot, is that purpose. It's very hard to sort of assess that sometimes. Engagement was the word I used before in offshore wind, and particularly relevant for those coming from other sectors like oil and gas. What does your company stand for? What do individuals stand for? Why are we all here, really, in a way? Finding that out is crucial to aligning alongside people's capabilities and competencies. People can have a lot of the right skills, but if it becomes too complex for them and it's not their purpose and their drive, then they'll often go back to what they came from, the sort of easier, more comfortable industries and projects. And it is difficult. Digging deep here is key, asking the same question several times. Interviewers generally have a well-prepared answer to that question, and it's not always a true representation of what they feel and want. And I guess the goal in the end is you want to find people whose head can do the job and whose heart wants to do the job. Offshore wind and its complexity adds another layer, I think. There's other competencies that you can look at depending on the culture and the role of the organisation. Competencies that sit within things like systems thinking, critical thinking, adaptability, learning agility we've mentioned, working with ambiguity, as well as some of the more traditional soft skills or competencies that we talk about around decision making, stakeholder management, resilience. Again, a lot of that will depend obviously on the culture, the organisation, the project, or maybe even the location in the country. There's factors. And from my time in Australia, I noticed that different countries and different project landscapes provide different levels of capability in adjacent industries. In Australia, linear infrastructure, given the size and scope of those projects, are incredibly complex. And they're often more complex than some of the offshore oil and gas projects. So, when recruiting for offshore wind, where there's no legacy industry in Australia, we sort of found that capability, that potential in markets that weren't necessarily, energy per se in terms of offshore oil and gas and stuff. Grethe, you joined relatively recently into offshore wind. How do you think you've used your sort of other sector skills in the roles or the role that you have now?
Well, I've used, I think, almost all of them. So I have been in the wind sector now for about 3 years, but I started in academia. I was a lecturer and a researcher on project management. Actually worked with Grethe Frislie as well. And then after I went into government, into the government, I found that was a completely different thing to be working there, even though both were public sector. And then I have been a project manager at a sub-supplier for the oil and gas industry, trying to make it in offshore wind. And well, the thing I've used most is that I'm not really afraid to learn something new, and I'm really excited to learn something new. And I struggled a bit to actually find the information I needed about offshore wind. Like the project management part was fine. That is different between all the sectors, and you just have to learn the professional language and understand all the three letter shortenings and just adapt to that. But finding the information was really, really hard. And that's when Matthew approached me, like the headhunter he is, and just said, yeah, I saw your CV on LinkedIn. I think you would be really great here for the center. And I'm like, yeah, I looked at it and I don't think so. I haven't been here for long and I really liked it. Really liked just staying there. And that was really interesting to me because he was able to tell me how I would actually fit into this role. I had been in so many different sectors and different kind of roles that I knew different professional languages. And just by knowing these different languages, I am able to translate a lot here where I am now. So whenever an industry partner is like complaining about something when they're trying to work with academia, and I'm like, yeah, but have you actually looked at the scope and seen the different incentives that are there? Because they have different ways of getting recognized as professionals. Firstly, they have different ways of being funded and different time restraints. And the part is like, if you're saying the same thing but meaning different things, it could be as different as speaking Spanish and Finnish. You wouldn't understand each other anyways. So I've been using like everything I've learned from all the sectors. And it's really fun when you can go out there and just ask other actors things. Like I have been in so many different roles and seen different sides of one thing, one problem, that I'm able to ask the questions that they perhaps haven't thought about themselves. like, why haven't you talked to these people? They're already doing this. Oh, we didn't know. That's a different sector, different industry. Yeah, but it's worth checking out, isn't it? I've been using like everything, and mainly my own curiosity, of course.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned earlier, curiosity is something I think recruiters, and certainly at Six Group here, we have an analogy that we use with clients, which is the penguins and the peacocks. And in this instance, Grethe, well, you're the peacock, not the penguin. What we tend to find is organisations are generally very good at hiring the same after the same after the same, and they're the penguins. And the two outcomes of that is, one, it can make it hard, but not impossible for peacocks to get in. But secondly, you don't get that diversity of thought. And organisations and teams generally that have diversity of thought are often better at coping with change and being resilient, which, as we've mentioned, is critical in offshore wind. I think, we talked a little bit about sort of how you assess and or how you look at understanding whether people can move into the environment from external sources. There's another area to this which is worth pointing out, which is that, sort of don't ignore what you've got at home sort of concept, which, by that I mean assessing capability of the people that you already have in your organisation, often in different business units or teams or locations. In most instances, these are capable people that have passed through interview processes and have been chosen to come into the organisation. But we find, when we talk about talent assessment with organisations, that it's quite ambiguous and obviously quite a wide concept. If you ask most people, how do you actually assess capability? You don't get much back, and I think at Six Group, we've tried to design a formula, which I think we believe has stood us well in the years that we've been going. And we look at 5 sort of data points, and there's a little bit of repetition here, but the first of that is that drive of the person. We talked about how to assess that. I think in this environment, we do it through psychometric testing generally. We like Saville, which is a provider of tests. We like Saville here because it's traits-based rather than types-based. So some of the psychometrics, for those that don't know, will describe you as a yellow pigeon or something like that. What you tend to find is once you've got that badge, you just become more of that person in that environment. Whereas the traits-based one gives you a list of where you sit on a dial in various behaviours. We try to focus on leadership, impact and risk with that. And what you really get to understand from that in that drive is, what do people think they're good at? What do people think they're not so good at? What do people like? What do people don't like? What do people think's most important in a job or role, and what's least important? So you get to understand that, that sort of drive and underpins their thinking. Second data point would of course be a competency assessment. We need to understand whether they've got the skills and experience fundamentally to do the job. That's done through an interview and an assessment. Then we do the behaviours assessment, what we talked about before, how they do things, why they did things in a certain way in the past, and we do that through situational assessments. And then we measure their agility. So how agile are they in their ability to think and act? Again, it's another role play based assessment, judgment test. Quite an interesting one, actually. It's the one that candidates tend to say to me at the end of it that they enjoyed most. It's often a very off-topic scenario that we throw at people, and they seem to quite enjoy it, actually. But all of those 4 things ultimately allow us to understand how good a person would be in a particular role. What it doesn't necessarily do is help us understand how they'll perform in that organisation and team. So that 5th data point is almost an interview of the organisation that we work with. We need to understand their culture, their strategy, their purpose, what we call context. So that gives the context. We like analogies here at Six Group. Another one we give with this one is context is like sport. What playing field are you actually playing on? The capability and competence that you need to be a hockey player in a team, very different than if you're a singles player playing tennis. So you need to understand that context, because that context dictates the type of capability you need. So ultimately, at the end, when you've got that fifth data point, you should be able to understand how that person will be able to perform in the role, but also in that context, also in that strategy, and in that particular organisation and in that particular culture. We did invite sort of questions before the event, and we had a few come through, and I think Ottar's got one for us now, but just mindful of the time, we've got a couple of minutes left. One did intrigue me, Grethe, and I think perhaps some of the more technical-minded members might, was the sort of projects that you referenced. Can you tell me a little bit more of them? You know, what were the scopes, sizes, technologies?
Yeah. So I mentioned we need the reference projects because there hasn't been built any parks in Norway. And yeah, so we talked with the industry actors, what was the most likely size of the projects, so that we could give the exact same parameters to everyone, so we would really quality assure the estimations coming in. So basically, it was a bottom fixed and a floating project, two different ones. And just said it has to be 1.5 gigawatts, because that's what they say would be the biggest part and the one most cost effective. And the bottom construction would be within the Norwegian value chain. There would be, I think there was a couple of more parameters as well, but the main thing is they all got the same parameters, and it was really interesting because the bottom fixed, of course, will have different estimations than the floating, because it's a much more mature project area. Internationally, there's a lot of them. So then you can have the information in, you have the best practices. But for floating offshore wind, you will have to combine different areas in order to, like what we already have here in Norway with the offshore industry otherwise. And then you have to experiment a bit more. So there's a lot more people needed. But yeah, it was really fun to watch this and see how the actors were really unsure how to estimate this firstly, and then just working with them and actually pushing some numbers out of them.
That's good. I'm glad you included a floating project. I have long held hopes that Norway will become one of the leaders of that particular technology, but we'll see. I know it's 10:30 and there's a few people I have to sign off. Ottar, did you want to ask your question quickly if you stay online?
Yes, please. Grethe and Matthew and all, nice to meet you, listen and learn. Question, these graphics you showed in the beginning, Grethe, showed the need of capacity and competence needed in the years going forward. How many companies and what type of companies have you asked to create these numbers?
Oh yeah, so we have, I think it was between 16, no, I think it was 15, 16 companies that we had like really intense estimations processes with. They were from all parts of the value chain. We were really strict about that. We needed like the same amount, so we have something to compare with. And they were covering the entire value chain. So when everyone made their each individual estimations, we had to do all the small puzzling and make sure there was no double registrations here. So it was a lot of work, but the results is really cool. And we have the report with all the information about what is like who participated and how this actually was made and what the results actually are with the numbers and stuff. It's on HavvindNO under the VindKOMP theme. So please go in and look at it as well.
And a version in English, I believe, Grethe, as well.
I think there should be.
There is, I think, yeah. I've seen it, yeah. So for those that don't speak Norwegian like me. But all right, I'm mindful of time. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you found it interesting and useful. We'll share this video we've recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch and listen again if you're so inclined. And we'll also provide an email with with both mine and Grethe's contact information. Should you wish to get in touch with either myself or her with any more specific questions. But yeah, have a lovely rest of the day, everybody, and a week ahead, wherever you might be. And thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Go right.